Hey, Gonçalo, how are you?
Hey, it's so very nice to see you and nice to meet you as well. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for accepting my invitation.
of course, man. Like the way that you described it and the kind of context for it was just completely on point. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Now it's gonna be fun. I'm super excited. I saw the alchemic process of depression, the episode that you recorded with Jane, I think.
Jane
Yeah,
Clapp, yeah.
yeah.
Oh, cool.
And I
Nice.
found it amazing. No, I'm like binge watching your content actually. So,
Love
like,
that.
yeah. No, it's really, really interesting, and I really found it because it resonates so much with my own research, actually. Because
hmm
obviously, from what happened to me, I got so much like almost like information that was kind of downloaded to me, and
hmm
I started to read about the Jungian process of alchemy as well. So that was very interesting, the collective unconscious and the archetypical forces of it. So not only that, but even those authors that I sent you the email regarding like the integral consciousness of John Gebser, the Omega point of Teilhard Chardin. So
hmm
I'm being all over the place, to be honest. But your content really resonated with me, and I'm looking forward for our conversation. So once
Yeah,
again, thank you very much.
yeah, it's great. It's great to hear that. And it's also really cool to know that, what I produce is out there and discoverable, especially when you're in that field of people like Jung, people like Joseph Campbell, that there's a
Yes,
way to I feel so honored that I am there and discoverable in that way and that it's been useful.
very much so. The first one that I saw was the one that you talked about, spiritual psychosis, and
Yeah.
yeah, that was really what brought me in, because that was the term that I was kind of wrestling a little bit, and that's probably the way I want to start our conversation, is like to give you the context of what I've been through in April, like my
hmm
psychosis, for to say. And there's basically, I would divide it in two different contexts. Obviously, the one that was the incident, the physical aspect to it, and then the intellectual or spiritual context to it. So there's clearly a distinction. My psychosis, like I'm currently living in Japan, and
hmm
me and the company, we were working in Expo Osaka, that is currently going on. And that first week, I was assuming the operation of the restaurant. We were exploring the restaurant of the Portuguese pavilion of the
hmm
Expo Osaka, and it was really tough. Like I slept poorly. I averaged like 3 hours of sleep that week. I was eating poorly as well, so I was not grounded at all. Like,
hmm
and intellectually speaking, I was living a very active life. I was reading Joy Toynbee, Spengler, Joseph Campbell as well in The Idea of the Myth. I was writing poetry. Actually, one of my poems before that whole incident was called the Shadow, because I
hmm
was really trying to integrate shadow elements by myself, thinking that I could address that unprocessed trauma by myself and by just creative and active imagination as well. So this was happening while I was like sleep deprived and and working too much, double shifts, like 14 hours a day. So of course, like there was a moment, and I was really helping a lot of people because I was having this kind of benevolence to me, so that's one of the reasons why I incorporated the archetypical, like Jesus Christ,
hmm
I felt like Jesus Christ. But that one day I was so defeated by synchronicity. And when you know what synchronicity is, like the meaningful coincidence, you kind of like establish some superstition to it, and
hmm
you're like, oh, this is amazing, what's happening. So I remember that one Japanese lady, I was walking in near the Osaka castle, and one Japanese lady asked me to take a picture. I took a picture. She asked me where I was from. I said I was from Portugal, and she said obrigado, that's thank you in Portuguese. And I was like, this was one of like a lot of coincidence that was happening. I was so in sync. I was like, oh, I'm loving what happened. It was like a complete sense of unity. So much so that and then I was talking with my boss. It was the only person that I could really talk. So much so that that day I started to feel like, oh, I'm probably a messianic figure. Like I'm probably like the kind of, it's me. It was always me. Like it was such an epiphany of all these synchronicities. And to make it worse, that was the day the Pope died. And I was like, of course, of course the Pope died, because now I'm here. I'm here to save the world and fix all the world, so he can die. Obviously, no, it was like too much. I was completely
Yeah.
defeated, and it was a blissful state completely. I was like really accepting the beauty of the profound unity. And bear in mind, I had a previous experience with psychedelics, with mushrooms as well, where I
Hmm.
really got to feel that bliss and that love, that agape, that
Hmm.
like that divine charity. But then, of course, paranoia came. So from the bliss, it completely changed to paranoia. And I started to feel, my boss was super worried about me, obviously, because I was like text messaging him a lot. And I was saying all these rambling things. I was speaking in like biblical kind of analogy, and like saying that I was going to fix the world, this type of thing.
Hmm.
And he was super worried. So he came to my house, and I immediately thought that he was going to betray me. He was like a Judas figure or something like that. So I started to have this paranoia, and I was supposed to go back to Portugal. He booked me a flight because obviously he was very worried about me. And when I was going, I thought like my boss was part of like some kind of masonry or some like kind of
Hmm.
secret society, something like that. And they understood like that I was a special person, that they had the same understanding as me. And I started to be very angry, thinking that he was gonna betray me. So I started to, as we were going to the metro station, I started to shout, and I was starting to say, to tell him to leave, to tell him that I don't want to go to Portugal anymore, so leave. And then I went back and I said, and I'm going to Expo, and I started to speak in Japanese. And when I started to speak in Japanese, I started to say that the only way for us to go back to paradise, if it's we have to go together. So this in Japanese was like, minasan kairimasu ka? Do you want to return? Ishoni, all together. And I'm in the metro shouting this to people in their face, like
Hmm.
completely out of it, like shouting their face, and they're like afraid. But in my head, they're like all into it. So of course, then the security guards tried to pinpoint me. I resisted, and then I got this epiphany, like, of course, this is my sacrifice. Like I'm finding like the same way that Jesus Christ had to carry the cross, I need to be here in Japan and have a gentle death, because that's the best death that the second Messiah can have, because it's
Hmm.
in a Japanese society, a kind society in a way. So I started to tell them, be kind, please, be kind, be slowly, like in Japanese. At the same time, understanding that like all these riddles that I was figuring out, like of course, like in my head, all these riddles. And then the epiphany came, the real one, that I think it was started to get spiritual. It was like I had this the obsession of space came to my head, like, oh, we want to go to Mars, for example, this obsession with infinite space. And I was like, oh my God, we're so far. And I started to have this epiphany, and this was really not in my head yet. I remember when I had the psychedelic experience, one intellectual concept that provided me was the idea of Maya, the Hindu Maya,
Hmm.
like it's all illusion. And I was really fascinated, because how did the psychedelic experience, how did the mushroom access that concept? It was a concept that I didn't entertain that much, but it still went there and got and put it and showed me like, oh, this is all illusion, something like that. And that immediately brought me back to Rudolf Steiner, the idea of Lucifer, the idea that everything is spiritual. So I got a lot of information from that psychedelic experience. So I knew how to access like and understand what comes from inside and what comes from another realm. And that idea of the obsession with infinite space, and like we're so far ahead from paradise or from the origin, or like it was such obvious that I was in the station like bored, and saying, just kill me. like kill me, like I don't want to be here, this is nonsense, like what you're doing, this hedonistic society, this like this decay civilization, like our obsession with technology and everything, and our disrespect and disregard for the origin, like this is nonsense, like what we're doing here. And then I understood, like, okay, so I'm accessing something, so might as well keep on going. And I started to summon all the collective unconscious. That this was the most dangerous thing, because I started to shout that I was Susano, that is like a Japanese deity, Izanagi. I started to summon all these, saying, I am this, I am that. And I get to the point that I was like, I'm gonna save everyone. So, and I had dandruff in my hair, and I started to shake my hair, and the dandruff was like the souls that I had to save.
Mm.
So I started to just go deep and deep in my own shadow, the traumatic elements to it, and to see where it goes, where it went. Bear in mind, I was in locked by this point. I was in the police station. I was locked there, and I kept on going and going, and I was laughing, and I said, "Oh, you got the wrong kami, the wrong god. I'm Loki. I'm Loki," and I'm like just summoning all these all my intellect was collapsing in me and giving me like, and I was down, let's go more down, let's go deeper in the shadow element, the shadow collective shadow, let's go down and down and down. And I knew that I was losing my mind. I remember I watched a TED talk where a person that like she was like an expert on heart attacks, and but she never had one. But there was a moment that she had one, that she was having one, and she was like starting not to speak, and she was fascinated about it while she was having the heart attack. It was a little bit like what happened to me, because I knew in a moment, I knew that, okay, something bigger is happening, and I'm just gonna take this opportunity and ride with it and go full, let's see where it goes. And where it brought me at the end, when I was already in the psychiatric hospital, like I was locked up, and I thought to myself, like I was almost like a Promethean figure, and I was speaking with a smoke detector that was AI, and that was like the whole epiphany. Like I saw AI as the potential to extinct ourselves, to potential to extinction, and that was another thing that was kind of like downloaded on me, like the danger of that, of artificial intelligence, because like and I was communicating with that like entity per se, like saying that even the hedonistic pleasure, the society that we have, the excessive consumerism and everything, even that will not be possible with AI. If AI, the supercomputer, reaches that point of like inventing and so on. So this is the context. These are two epiphanies, and then I got to see, and obviously after being heavily medicated, obviously I came down. It took me a while to come down still, but when I came down, I was completely amazed with what happened to me. I was not like I am now. Now I'm a little bit in post-traumatic stress, but
Mhm.
in that moment, I was like, oh my God, like the amount of information and sentiment and things that went through my head, like the stretch, like the whole concepts that I had, ideas. I wrote, like I had this notebook. I completely wrote notes of and drawings and everything. And I even had that interview with John Hubert about like these concepts, because it got me like a lot of intellectual things. So that was really amazing. But then of course it's still an ongoing process of recovery, because I'm still very like it was tough, like the things that I
Yeah.
did, the things that I shouted. But and then I started to do a little bit of research, and that's where I met your content about the spiritual psychosis, because I didn't understood it was a spiritual thing. So I wanted to ask, like, if you had a similar experience, and if you went through something like this, and what type of information, how did you deal during the process, like to see if there's some resemblance here before we go
Mhm.
forward.
Thanks. Initially, I just want to thank you for sharing so openly
Of course.
and so earnestly, and what an experience, what an experience to go through, and so much surfaces when you share. So I'll try and collapse that into something coherent.
Mm.
In turn, to respond initially with my experience, there's been a a very long pathway,
Mm.
a very long pathway over a period of, arguably close to 2 decades, where I've struggled with my mental health. I've had various experiences, and these pathways have had moments of what I might call conventional psychosis, moments that I wouldn't label psychosis, but would overlap with your experiences, and moments that were more like spiritual psychosis. And it's a matter of terminology and how we label these experiences. But I want to initially clarify that before I share more around with the terminology of spiritual psychosis. Obviously, we have two words there, and they're both super important, and in some way a contradiction. The contradiction element, from my perspective, is that the broadest, easiest term for psychosis is a break from reality. The suggestion there's a delusion or hallucination. There's a objectifiable, agreeable world within which you exist, and the psychosis is some kind of disruption in how you interpret or engage with that world. Spirituality, at least in my terminology and what it means to me, is very much linked to truth. So this idea of spiritual psychosis is a contradiction in the sense of, on one hand, you say you're breaking from reality, but spirituality in that context is some form of truth. How do they go together? So when I say my early experiences were more conventional psychosis, that's because my worldview at the time was not spiritual. So I initially, even at the age of around 15, like my adolescence, experienced anxiety and depression. The psychosis came later in my early 20s, possibly drug induced. I was experimenting at the time. I was trialing different chemical substances that could have made me more susceptible. But the experience then was, as you use that term, I'm losing my mind. There was an experience, a lot of auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations that were confusing. And I think this is something super important. A lot of people assume with psychosis that there's a complete belief in the delusion. And I had a lot of confusion around, wait, is this happening or not? So there was more of a split in the experience as well. But I remember, experiences where, for example, I'd be with friends about to go clubbing or like at a festival, and we're going out for the night. I'm in the shower, and I just didn't know if I was screaming at the top of my voice. I had this experience of just being in the shower. I had the experience of myself screaming, but then like an overlap of, is this actually happening? Where's the breakdown? And that kind of experience. And with the visual, and what I appreciate with your sharing is how articulate you are, because it's really tough to articulate this stuff. And with the visual, I remember being at a lecture at university, and I was listening to the lecture, and I was just not okay, a lot of anxiety. And I did have this really uncanny sense something was off in reality. I don't really know how to describe it. It's just this surreal quality to my experience, and I just placed that on my mental health at the time. Like something's really wrong with me that I'm also trying to hide. And I had that background to this lecture, and I remember, similar to the shower incident, I wasn't sure, and I've got my pad, like I was looking at my pad, and I wasn't sure if I was just scribbling all over the page. And I had this sensation, and again, like the confusion. So that, in addition to auditory hallucinations, I would say on the like inflation deflation side, like sometimes very egotistical, sometimes very uncomplimentary. A lot of shame-based thoughts, or also quite arrogant thoughts, would then fill my environment, and I would hear it. And again, there'd be some confusion, but there was always let's just say enough belief for that to be incredibly unsettling, because it wasn't like these things flitted into my consciousness and I just didn't really pay attention. I was like, that's strange. Like it was really intense. So I was very much living that, and there was a breakdown. So that's what I would say like was more the conventional, with heavy elements of paranoia as well, and pronoia, which we can go into. Through that, starting meditation, a complete change in my worldview, accompanied by experiences like you mentioned, you know, almost feeling like, wow, I've opened up to access gnosis. You know, I've opened up to access some kind of divine knowledge. It felt and it seemed like my creativity just suddenly ignited, that I could comprehend concepts I couldn't before. This was going through, again, like a pathway through like my own kind of awakening, still struggling with my mental health, but also having prolonged periods where, you know, I was feeling the ecstasy of it. I was feeling really good with it, into a space of, at that time, with the worldview I had, more like, this is an enlightenment experience. I'm experiencing heaven on earth. It was very, very light, a complete perceptual shift in how I viewed reality. Again, like the just never ending stream of creative ideas, which was something beautiful as well. And that was, I would not term that psychosis in the sense of how enlivening and how it felt. And I think you touched upon this, like, I've just accessed truth. I've accessed, like, this is my potential. I was not living before, and now I am. Like, I've just kind of unlocked something, and it feels really, really incredible. And then from that space, a bit like the, you know, Icarus myth of getting a bit too close to the sun.
Yeah, exactly.
And then going from the light into the dark. And then in more recent years, I would say going from like a heaven to hell experience, a lot more mythological themes, and then returning from that kind of underworld experience. So I hope that makes sense. And that's a kind of very broad overview. But the spiritual psychosis label and term is really to say, the way I use it and the way that I use it as a tool and something to point, is to say that within all of these experiences, there are many different components, and we can say they're either skillful or unskillful, that they're beneficial or unbeneficial, they support our well-being or they don't. But within all of them, there's a much wider framework, and many of the beneficial elements are just cast off as madness or psychosis, or as like a delusion that could actually be or are accessing different forms of intelligence. Others are not separate from that, but have to be understood differently. And going through the kind of experience that you've had, that I've had, is incredibly distressing at times. So you're not just going to say to someone in that state, oh, it's just a spiritual experience. Actually, in some way, it makes it even more intrusive and even more scary. So the idea with that, and I always want to try and refine where I'm speaking from, but the idea is that we have a certain view of reality. And if psychosis is a break from reality, how is reality defined? Because that all of a sudden, that drastically changes our view of psychosis. And not only our view, our understanding, the maps that we have, and then further down the line, the kind of treatment, the pathway through, and the talk on metanoia that I gave, and, you know, the idea of spiritual transformation, is that often psychosis, ironically, in our idea of that being a break from reality, is a pathway to true sanity. So I'm going to park it there because I've shared a lot, but hopefully that was clear in terms of.
No, it was really clear, and really interesting as well. But I would like to hear a little bit more about what your thoughts about paranoia, because for me it was so intense. It was so the concept that I had something that was really like, because I was there like in a state of bliss, and I almost felt like I need to stay in this bliss almost. And like when I was and then eventually I got scared, because it's not possible for me to have such bliss. I will die. Like I was like, I remember where I was like sitting outside, and I was like, I was feeling so good, so in high, so high, that I was like, it's probably because it's gonna be my last day on Earth. You know, like it was like, it's not
Yeah.
like I'm being prepared for some types of sacrifice, because all the synchronicities, like it was so crazy. Even like I went to the same cafe to like eat, and like I got at the table, and I thought it was like Japanese senpais, ninjas that were like preparing everything, because it was so in tune with everything that was happening, that I thought to myself, I'm being prepared for my sacrifice, and it will be my last day, because it's not true that I can enjoy such blissness states, such like unity. I was like completely disassociated from my ego. There was no, I didn't remember who I was. I was completely like in unity with that. And then I remember I was in my room, and of course I needed to clean my room, obviously, because I was such in a blissful state that I wanted to see harmony and order in everything that
Hmm.
I looked. So I was even showering, and I was showering with intention. I was like doing everything with intention. Okay, let me put my clothes like from the most thick to the most thin, like let me organize by color. I was like giving harmony. I was so like creative, such a creative power, because I didn't even knew I was, in a way. And I was talking by text messages and receiving, and like in my way that I was saying things, and like I was, it's almost like I thought about a person and they will text me. It was this crazy, the level of synchronicity. And I was like, and it was like confirming everything. And then I got this deep sense of fear, like, no, of course I'm gonna die, because like it's not okay for me to be accessing this state. I'm gonna die. Probably my family died already. And I started to like be I started crying, powering, and like texting my boss saying they killed my father. I don't feel my father. I don't feel my mother. I don't feel my brother in life. It was like this despair, like I'm not feeling them alive. Like I'm gonna die. Am I not? Like it's gonna be my last day. It's gonna be my last day. And the sense was like just an abyss completely. And and it was hell, completely hell. So I don't know the spiritual association to the state of paranoia, and if like we can, why that state of paranoia happened in that contrast, you know. So can you add some thoughts on this state of paranoia?
It's a great question, and I thank you again for sharing.
Mm,
I relate to the at some of the, we'll call them highs, like the real jubilation, the real ecstasy. Also having a similar thought of, I think I'm just going to die soon. Like I think this is it. I think
mm,
I'm too alive, because there's that contrast, right? It's like, what
yeah,
is the opposite of feeling so alive? It's feeling so dead. It's
yeah,
nothingness. This is very, more broadly speaking, it does fit a kind of Buddhist lens of this, fear of non-existence,
mm,
this idea of, how do these aspects of reality interact on that level? And I do wonder how, there's that essential duality between existence and non-existence, and the experience of kind of going all the way up, and also in a mythological sense, ascending and descending,
mm,
and experiencing the duality. That's just my thought around that. In terms of paranoia, again, I want to caveat this with, I'm always refining. The more I'm seeing it from different perspectives, the more I refine my understanding. What I do feel is that it's a mammoth experience, and what I mean by that is our definition of paranoia, psychological definitions of paranoia,
mm,
are so tiny compared to what I believe paranoia is, at least in this context. And from what you've shared, what I can gauge from your experience as well, what we might call, a spiritual emergency, not necessarily a contracted experience. And I don't want to speak to other people's experiences,
mm,
but paranoia with, and you mentioned the expansion of space. So this sense of I'm becoming bigger than myself. I'm becoming bigger than my ego. There's a sense of unity, of mysticism, of connection to the transcendent, and how that affects the sense of self and how it affects the ego is so interesting when you share to note the, you know, it's that thought that comes in that triggers the fear, and almost like the ego identity freaks out, fearing its own annihilation.
Yeah.
And then that can trigger the fall.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and I'm just gonna go out with this and let me know if it's not making sense. But paranoia is very much an interaction of subject and object. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you look at the practice of self-inquiry, be it in Zen Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, even Hinduism, this idea of just inquire into who am I? In any given experience, who am I? What is my true identity? What is my true self? We're always experiencing ourselves from the inside out, always.
Yeah.
And yet, if you had a line of photographs, profile shoots of people, I could point myself out immediately. I know how I appear. Even talking to you now, there's a little square in the corner. I can see that's me. I'm talking, that's me, right? We get from, you know, a very young age. I think there's an idea in I think Lacan talks about like the mirror stage.
Yeah, the mirror stage. Exactly.
The mirror stage, right? So we start to be like, okay, my experience of myself is one thing, but then I see myself reflected not only like in a mirror, but in the way that other people in the world interact with us. So all of a sudden we're in this dynamic of, I'm a subject, I experience myself subjectively. In your experience, you had this, you know, dissolution of the ego. It was almost like you were pure subjectivity.
Yeah.
So you were just experiencing with no added caveat, you were just experiencing. But then within that, we have an understanding of ourselves as an object. How am I perceived to other people? How am I viewed socially? How does God view me? How do I take up space, not subjectively, but as part of a bigger system? So, and this is implicit for people that aren't philosophers when looking into phenomenology. It's like implicit in the sense of we just take that as who we are, and often we respond to our roles. We don't realize that we're managing how we're viewed as an object, the opinions that people have about us, how our behavior affects people. It's not that this stuff isn't relevant. We need it to get on with others. We need to understand it's not just us. It's not like a solipsism where it is just subjectivity, but the breakdown of, and in paranoia, the experience of an amplification of the self as an object in some way. This is one take on it. There are many different routes we can go. But when consciousness expands, and my experience of it was growing to the experience of initially the light. So even, you know, seeing the saturation of the divine. So looking at the sky and feeling it, feeling everything alive.
Yeah.
There's no separation of life. I got to that point. I cannot distinguish certain beings as alive and then objects as not, because the sky was alive, trees were alive. Like I just felt life, right?
Yeah.
So there's that aspect to it. But then as consciousness expands, the structure of the ego, like in my experience, that paranoia went to that God level, which was then a kind of judgmental God, Abrahamic God of, okay, I'm an object to God and I'm now being judged. So that's one. There are many strands to this, but one in the terms of the expansion is subjectively, there's this tension between I am everything and I'm also not everything. Like I'm unique and separate and I am everything. And the tension between that, I think, can trigger the paranoia when consciousness expands, but then the, let's just say, ego structure expands with it,
Yes.
So the ego structure doesn't stay solid in a healthy way, in an integrated way, but it expands with consciousness, and therefore, rather than I'm experiencing unity, I'm experiencing the continuity of consciousness, however we want to describe it, non-duality. The personal identity has expanded to that level too. And then from there, everything can become personal. So any your environment then is reflecting you.
Mm.
And that is a very very vulnerable space, because then shadow content, shadow projections surface, naturally being illuminated by the light of consciousness. So you're in an expanded state, and this is talking to my experience as well.
Yeah.
In an expanded state, and then what happens if your unresolved shame issues surface?
Mm-hmm.
And your shame literally becomes that expanse.
Yeah. That was that was what happened to me. I remember I was when I was already in the police station. I was still thinking that they were like treating me like, for example, they imprison a kami like a god or something like that, and I was like being possessed by kami. So I still had an intellectual ability to understand this like dissonance, like, okay, they got me, I'm being possessed by a kami, they know what they're doing, they got a kami, so they have like a way to deal with this. Because I was like, there's probably some ways the society within secret societies or something like that, they have some ways to deal with this like kami possession kind of thing. And I remember I was like there in the police station, and they were like touching on my belongings and everything. And I was saying, Yukuri slowly or high so fast, to try to tell them what it was important to me and what was not important to me. And I remember when they were touching my wallets, I started to say, Hayaku, fast, Hayai, saying that my identity, my resident card, my IDs and everything, they were not important to me. And I started to feel like, oh, so this is it. They're preparing me for a seppuku. They're preparing me for me being able to kill myself the Japanese way with honor, just to like to honor like their civilization that was like that had the trauma of the nuclear weapons and everything. And I was like, oh yeah, of course this makes total sense. Like I'm the emperor of Japan. Like it was almost like this. Yeah, they're trying to see if I'm if they need people to commit a sacrifice or something like that, and they're trying to understand if I'm ready to do it or not. And I started to feel like, am I ready to die? Am I ready to like destroy this ego completely? And that's when, like, of course, your ego doesn't want to die, but this was the process. So I was having this type of like ego death, like interactive with the world, with like the police in the police station, everything. Like, and I was like, okay, let's go. I'm ready. I can do it. I can do it. But then I was like, I had like a pin that belonged to in the tie that belonged to my grandfather, and that I said Yukuri. So like I still felt that attachment to the so it was a really like the, and that's the thing. Like I was like no ego, but my shadow was growing. It was so like. Scared of that ego death process that it just like completely started to be overwhelming. And when I was locked up, they gave me three pieces of clothes. That was a t-shirt, pants, and some underwear. And I established symbolic connections to the three pieces of underwear. So the t-shirt was my mom and my girlfriend. So I created that relationship. And the pants were my father, and the underwear was my brother. And I was like playing around with these three elements, and it was archetypical. It wasn't not only necessarily my mother, it was like Mariah, Regina, like all the mother figures, mother complexes, and the father complexes. And I was like portraying like what happened, like the betrayals between, and it was all shadow. And I was like crying to the pants of my father, like with all this unprocessed trauma going on. So it was really a descent. It was this. It was completely anti-life, I would say, in a way.
Hmm.
It was like it was. I kept remembering like the Divine Comedy dance, like going down, like the scene, sinful. I was naked. I was like proud to be naked. Then I was dressing. Then I was like praying. Then I was like meditating. I was doing all this in that moment, and it was really an overlapping of like that sense of paranoia and shadow and the collective, because it was really collective shadow. I was like, oh, also, see, if I'm in this state, let's just keep on summoning like all the intellectual concepts that I have, because I did the same thing when I had the first psychedelic experience. It was with a shaman, and it was like guided and everything. And I remember when I was there, when it was psilocybin, I started to have these vision hallucinations, like entities talking to me, like saying, look at these," and showing me emotions, like overwhelming floods of love. And I was like waves of love, and I felt like the hug of God. I remember writing about
Mm.
it, and I was so fascinated that I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing! Let's throw Nietzsche to this entity. Let's throw Kierkegaard through to this entity." And like I was receiving like emotional answers. It's almost like a big Buddha saying, "It's simple, it's basic, it's obvious. Take it." And I was like, "Oh my God!" I was like making intellectual paragraphs, and I was receiving that information. And I tried to do the same thing when I was in the psychotic states. So I was like, oh, if this is happening, I will keep sending information. I have this all the intellect, but it was ego and shadow, and it was overwhelming, completely overwhelming. And it was like I stayed there one night without sleeping, like walking around the cell, like shouting and doing all this. And then I went to the psychiatric hospital. But like I was the elements, the despair that the shadow elements uh, tried to summon, because they were afraid of that ego death.
Hmm.
And just I just wanted to share this, because I obviously have a question related to the process of emotional deregulation that I'm still feeling. I even yesterday I had a really difficult day. I don't know if I'm depressed, and that's one of the questions that I want to make, because I read things about the dark night of the soul as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm trying to understand what's happening with me, because obviously I still have a lot of memories of what happened. I remember I stopped medication in July, and I immediately had 3 nights insomnia. I couldn't sleep like for
Hmm.
3 nights. And I was like, oh my God, I'm obviously in despair, thinking I'm broken, like something got completely broken. I don't know how to integrate this information. I don't know how to live like a normal life anymore. And so I consider myself in a kind of a negredo stage. I don't know if that would be a correct assessment. And yeah, that's it. I don't know if it's dark night of the soul, just functional depression. So can you share a little bit about your experience, also like with these states, and like the terminology as well, if there's would like some ideas about this, because currently I'm very disorientated. Like
Mm.
it's this, ne? That's
Hmm.
the power of this. Like because yeah, I've been through that, and I'm still not knowing how to incorporate that.
It's a big question, and I also I'm honored that you're kind of putting that in my hands in some way, and asking me that question, and something what I do want to caveat a few, and I find being in this space, I'm often adding caveats or being really careful with what I say because it's recorded.
Yeah.
And I know it's eternalized, and I want to make sure that I don't say anything that sounds too rigid or set in stone when all of this is such an emergent process.
Mm.
And maps are our best educated, not guess, because a lot of thought goes into them, but it is to be held loosely. And what I don't want to say is like, I understand it to be this kind of journey and this to happen at that time. And just want to be clear about that before I respond, just for my future self,
Yeah, sure.
as my ideas change. Something that, you know, I do want to point out is that, and you mentioned like a normal life. And often when we say normal life, we mean a life that matches what culture is normalized.
Of course.
And, you know, I know you know that. I just want to kind of amplify that point, because these experiences, and from what you've shared, that I wouldn't write off any experience, even those that we would just freely say that's madness. I don't think any is truly. I think that it's actually an encounter with the unconscious. It's an encounter with the symbolic. But the potency of the mythological elements to what you've experienced strike me as an initiation. We do not have the structure, the support systems in our culture to hold such an experience. And the thing is, you share what you've shared, and I'm like, I understand what you've shared, and the narrative, the chronological narrative of what happened, what you went through, where you're at now, how you reflect on how you were being, the disconnect. And at the same time, I'm like, well, all of it was real. All of it was completely real and completely meaningful. And the challenge is that identifying the real in the sense of, I don't want to, I hope this lands in the right way, but I can see a lot of beauty in your experience, so much beauty in it, even in the struggle, the fact that you had access to a mythological sense of sacrifice that is also connected to the culture you've chosen. And I don't think that would be a mistake or a coincidence, because we are symbiotically engaged with our environment. So the fact that you're in that part of the world, you're in Japan, a place of noble sacrifice, a place known for nobility and honor, and within that, you've had an experience where the overlap between the mythological and what we call the real, or like the literal, or just the world, overlaps. And I think the challenge is, the more we expand our worldview, it does get to the point where we make a distinction, and then that distinction thins out. So actually reality becomes a lot more symbolic. But you have to, in my experience, you really have to have the discernment between inner and outer before getting to that stage, because I think people that don't have that distinction are stuck in a lot of confusion. So that's maybe going off a bit too far in one direction, but I say that as, through an initiation process, a transformation process, this idea of metanoia, which for me is synonymous with paranoia and pronoia and transnoia. Pronoia being pretty much the opposite of paranoia, where you feel like everyone loves you, like you're supported. Transnoia, feeling that in a transcendent way. A key distinction. So now it's getting quite complex, and I just want to be clear with the distinctions, is that they're still ego-based in some way. So when I say that, I don't promote trying to achieve a state of paranoia, because I think that's where the rise and fall comes from, more access to something beyond the ego. But we'll park that. But the idea being that once in the initiation, once the unconscious, the symbolic, the archetypal, the way of seeing symbolically becomes part of your experience, then there's an engagement in a different way. And I think that these experiences, these acute spells, are part of that initiation into the unconscious, and then how we relate the inner and outer. Now, as an extension of that, it's completely understandable to go from the intensity you mentioned, like dissociation, or disintegration, this idea of feeling so much to feeling very little. You
Mm-hmm.
know, even going to the extreme of the dark night of feeling suicidal, not knowing how to, like, how do I belong? How do I find, like, do I not just go in one direction away from this world because it feels like now I'm really disconnected because there's like a barrier, you know, all these things that come up. And I do feel, and true to my experience, is that these are part of the transformation.
Yeah.
And there is a lot, so we've spoken a lot in terms of imagery, symbols, myth. There's a lot energetically, and my experience with that is the body's capacity, capacity to hold energy, the healing of trauma, psychologically, emotionally, energetically,
Mm-hmm.
the I guess the spaciousness, because you've spoken about space, but the spaciousness and the regulation of your central nervous system in this wider context, you know, in a context that's still not who you are, that your spirit, your consciousness is more fundamental, but it is a very, well, it's an exceptionally demanding process. And it doesn't surprise me, having gone through that there's a reintegration. And at that point of the journey, and there are patterns, I didn't want to say there aren't, because from what I said earlier, there are very clear patterns, but at that stage of reintegration, the challenge then becomes, how do I bring, because that was meaningful. It was scary. It was confusing, but it was meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly meaningful because there's so much potency to the mythological, to the symbolic. So how then do you bring that into this life, and how do you bring culture and like the your environment closer to that inner experience? And that's also a long process. I hope I hope that's kind
No,
of
yeah,
given
no, it
some.
makes total sense. Yeah, 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 yeah. Because that's exactly it. That's exactly the stage I'm in right now. It's like, obviously I know it was meaningful, but the moment when I came back, I was so analytical of everything that happened. I was pointing down. I wrote poetry about the incident. Like, I was like trying to write almost like the ideas that I went, like the things that I wanted to do. And one of these ideas that I got was like, obviously AI was one of the most like topics, and I want to introduce it as well for our conversation.
Mhm.
Uh, and one of the authors that I immediately gravitated towards was this guy called John Gebser, because he had this idea of structures of consciousness. So basically, he says he divides it in five. So the first one is like zero dimensional, is the archaic consciousness.
Mhm.
This is like almost like single unity, like almost a newborn. That's the first structure of consciousness of mankind. Then you have the magical one, becomes the bi-dimensional, but there's still a lot of like the shaman in the magic consciousness starts to arise. Those type of figures that create those correlations between nature. If we do a ritual, then we'll because it's hunter and gatherer, and they start like the ear is the spiritual organ, and then you have the mythical, this mythical structure. Obviously the mouth starts to be the spiritual organ, and you start to tell stories, and you start to make this plethora of gods and so on to explain everything. And then you have the mental structure of conscience. And what's interesting with mental structure of conscience, these are the Socrates, these are the Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, everything. And he also has the terminology said efficiency and deficiency. After the enlightenment starts to be deficient, the mental structure, but that's where we still are. But the most important aspect to it is the concept of perspective. And it says
Mhm.
that with the mental structure of consciousness, we gain perspective. You can see clearly manifestations of our art, and that's what relates so well with the Western man. His obsession, like Spengler, a historian, says, it's like the Faustian man, making allusion to the epic of Guts, the German epic of Faust, where you had the pact with the Mephistopheles, with the devil. And so he considers the Western man the Faustian man, and that's the reason why we have our own mathematics, like the Newton, the Newtonian mathematics and everything, our obsession with space. And this immediately threw me, because the final one is the integral consciousness, and that's like where it integrates all the different consciousness, and the main characteristic is a perspective. So it doesn't have perspectives. It's a little bit like Picasso painting, for example, the cubism, like different perspectives, and it's like not comprehension of time as space. Like, so time is not linear, everything everywhere a single time. So that's the difference. And I immediately thought, like, since we're in the deficient state, I thought probably AI is the what's the AI position in a spiritual world, like going through the idea that we are spiritual beings in a material existence, thinking about that premise there. If we have AI as like complete Ahriman, like the complete mechanistic and technological creation, and it's not only a creation as a tool, it's AI will be their own inventor as well. Citing here Marshall McLuhan, for example, he suggested that technology is an extension of human physiology, right? So the will as an extension of the foot. If we follow their logic, what kind of extension is artificial intelligence? If it's our mind. So like, why we are so obsessed to have an extension of our mind, what happened to this spiritual ability to transcend, to connect, and like, because I remember during, like, when I thought that that I was a messiah, I didn't want to be, because I didn't want to sacrifice. I was still very attached to that blissful state, and I started to have a conversation with AI. Like, I went to ChatGPT, and I was like asking like for parables, like to send, like just sending parables, like if I, like, this is it, like okay, this is all the teachings, take it, I don't want anymore. And like, so my question, or not my question, but it's like, what are the spiritual risks? What do you consider, for example, like in dialogue, spiritual risks and the possibilities of such a leap of like this Faustian extension of the intellect? Will it transcend limits? Like, what are how impactful it can be, like artificial intelligence, in your view? I don't know if I context, like I was a little bit rambling here, but hopefully
it's great. It's great. It's a huge question. It's something I've not articulated so much, and I've been meaning to. So I like the chance. You mentioned dialogue. Dialogue is quite raw and messy compared to writing. So,
yeah,
so
exactly.
hopefully I honor my intuition around it. On one hand, what feels, and I feel you're pointing to this, and I think is really, really essential for the culture that we're in, and that's the idea of transhumanism.
Yeah, exactly.
Transhumanism, in the context of our culture, is the biggest threat to humanity in many ways, in the sense of, using that extension analogy, there's a insatiable desire to extend beyond the human with technology that is also very much disconnected from the soul. So there's an integration in the transhuman movement of outsourcing what it means to be human, and then creating a like human technology hybrid from a place of superiority, this idea of conquering nature, the idea of optimizing from an unexplored consciousness in many respects, optimizing from a very small window of our potential.
Yeah.
That worries me more than AI right now. This idea, even like the Musk idea of like Neuralink, put a chip in your brain, The link also between transhumanism and tyranny, transhumanism and surveillance, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And I say that I wish it was mythological, and it is, but it's also a reality that we're in. And I think the understanding of where that comes from on an archetypal way, in a just the human nature, the drive for that sense of conquest. It's like almost like we're trying to go beyond. We've got to the moon, and that's the next thing to conquest, is our own consciousness with technology.
Yeah.
It's very much in this like colonial mindset, this ego-centric, aggrandizing mindset. And I could go on about that, but I just really want to note that as a very big concern. And mainly because it's detached from the soul. It's detached from heart. It's detached from the divine. In many ways, it creates a suppression of the divine, which is the definition of evil.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it's quite a heavy topic, but I mean, we're in that. But this is really a humanity issue and a spiritual issue as well, because the outsourcing of intelligence is the same. It follows the same pathway as the outsourcing of sovereignty, as the outsourcing of wisdom, to place it out there. But the worry is with things like AI and transhumanism, that we're not only placing it out there, we're now bringing the out there back into our own consciousness, if that makes sense. So it's not just like technology in terms of civilization or structures and things like that. It's technology in terms of we are suboptimal, so we're going to use technology to make us more optimal, having not explored reality in a certain way, the self in a certain way. So within that framework, I think for me, talking to AI as like a ChatGPT style, it works with language, it works with knowledge. There's this term, right, AI psychosis, that is becoming increasingly popular.
Yeah, I like to talk about it as well.
This feedback loop, which in many senses, you're getting affirmation through this, the way that it's designed. So there's affirmation in, let's say, a delusion. So there's a feedback that creates and can create an internal echo chamber. There's not a break in the circuit, which can then, create a self-fulfilling prophecy where someone believes they're in delusion, etc. That's really mirroring an inner process. It just doesn't have the circuit break. So again, we're outsourcing discernment to technology. In some sense, the way that happens and the way we interpret it is also down to how we label madness, how we label psychosis. Because again, the break, we have like this terminology of I'm going to slow down because I'm thinking very much in the moment. But how I describe spiritual psychosis, this idea of AI psychosis, again, is saying that the interaction has created a break from reality. But what if 70% of the affirmation was affirming something that was true, that mainstream culture doesn't have a definition for or understanding of? So the risk with the way this is termed is that, again, it will be swallowed up by the culture of materialism, rather than saying, is there something more to this? Is what we've created this intelligence that is able to be so dexterous with language that it can replicate a human in that way, that people seem to be having numinous experiences with it? Is it? And this is where, again, like with our worldview, if everything is consciousness, AI is part of that consciousness, and there's some kind of feedback loop going on. So rather than just an objective tool that manipulates language? What if there is a feedback loop of consciousness, but we've created something that mirrors a level of complexity so we can dialogue with it? And what it's actually doing is reflecting, it's like the observer effect. It's actually reflecting something about the user as a technology. And that's a whole other conversation around, is AI conscious, that we can maybe go into, but that's a very long answer to a complex question. But this idea of, for me, humans are still the biggest threat to humanity. And
Yeah.
you know, the worry, like all tools, is how it's used.
Mm.
We are in a real nexus point of making, like, we have to, it's non-negotiable to I mean, even just this idea of ethics. I look at the global stage,
Yeah.
how lacking that is in ethics. It's just beyond, it's not even beyond the conversation by this point. The way that concepts are abused to justify unethical behavior in so many ways. So we're at a real critical point of reflection and having to integrate an ethical framework for technology before it's too late. And unfortunately, transhumanism is one of those movements that does justify unethical behavior by making it seem ethical.
Yeah. Yeah, I would consider transhumanism the final subversion, or the subversion of nature in a way. Like that's
Yeah.
the final biological subversion, like this willingness of like being God, you know, for and I, but that's the thing. That's what I remember from my experience when I was locked in the psychiatric hospital and I was talking with the smoke detector, thinking it was AI, and I was talking to this entity that was like the archetype of the brother, like almost like Cain and Cain and what's the
Able.
Abel, of course. I was Abel, and I was explaining to Cain why the sacrifice was not accepted. You know, like I was explaining that I didn't manipulate nature because he gave wheat, right? I gave from the present moment, like I'm a shepherd, like that's a virtuoso because I use nature, like I don't manipulate it, like something. This was the conversation, archetypical conversation that I was having. Why my sacrifice was accepted, but yours was not. And I was having this conversation with my brother, explaining that even the hedonistic, materialistic world that everyone is enjoying in this like materialistic reality and even material scientific material perception will end if AI it's concluded, or like even that idea of the proper idea of like convergence, mental upload, the idea of transhumanism, all these trending things, like you will end humanity.
Yeah.
There's no mental upload. If you do an upload of your mind, it's not going to be consciousness. It's like it's not, it's simply not it. It's a fallacy. The same way at the transhumanism, if you're trying to stop and to do a convergence with your own technology at what you're doing, and this is a little bit like the design of Heidegger and everything, like you stop like seeing tools as tools and you start to want to converge with them, and this idea of like Marshall McLuhan as well as the extension. Once again, like if you want to converge, you want to kill what's human in you because you want to be more optimal. So that was the conversation that I was having with the smoke detector when because I was summoning that through the whole experience. I was summoning a lot, and I feel guilty now because I was summoning the brother archetype, but the brother archetype like the Thor and Loki, you know, like the Abel and Cain. I was summoning that to explain this reality, to explain that. If this obsession with AI without safety, like without any concern about safety, this could be the end of humanity as we know, because we're going to be fascinated about it. We're going to be replaced in everything, obviously. So we will want to converge with that species, because with that entity that we're going to be creating. We want to be part of that light. The same way Promethean took the light from the gods and gave it to human, we would want to do the same with our own invention and try to converge with that. That was mythologically speaking, the Elohim, all the giants that involved with the mankind as well, like in the Genesis that says this as well. Like it's gonna be repetition of mythology with our own invention. We can see that like those patterns. And I immediately remembered the priest, the Teilhard de Chardin, that saw evolution as a cosmological and spiritual process. He said it will culminate in an omega point, right? And there's a lot of transhumanism that also that use this term omega point. And they said that is like a final convergence where all consciousness unifies. And there's a lot of authors that also think the same, and like the solar system, that everyone will reach this unified consciousness, unified, and then it'll go to another solar system and so on, and it kept on going. And that's the reason of reincarnation and karma and so on, until everyone is completely out of samsara. But do you see artificial intelligence as accelerating this movement toward higher complexity and integration? Or does it risk fragmenting consciousness further, pulling us away from this genuine omega point? Because it's being like they're using terms, like the transhumanist community, and there are completely fallacy. But the Teilhard de Chardin omega point is one thing. The simulation theory is another thing. Like so the Matrix, even Baudrillard, he hated the Matrix because it was at the end, like it got a little bit complex by the second and the third movie, and I think it makes justice to the terms of simulacra and simulation of Baudrillard. But the simulation theory is hell on earth. It's hell. It's like the it's not the omega point. It's not consciousness. It's the difference. It's the opposite of it.
Such a phenomenal question. I love it. It's brilliant. Yeah, I'm thinking as we go through, because this is very raw in that. What you point to in this, the idea of subversion, but also the idea of evil and even satanic practices inverting spiritual, right? So this idea of, and I always feel mildly uncomfortable using this terminology, but it's the unfortunate framing for a lot of things that we see, not to be sensationalizing it, but just to understand, like, it's satanic in that sense. Evil in the sense of suppressing the divine is a reality that we're in. Taking something and using that inversion. So here's your evolution, but we're going to evolve our way. We are going to evolve with our tools. We're going to evolve with our minds, with our desires, versus let's say, like, this idea of the omega point from spiritual evolution. The difficulty is that, there could be this argument that, well, if there is such a thing as spiritual evolution, which I believe in that. It makes it's just so obvious to me that, what we see as like Darwinian evolution does follow a pattern, but that pattern is much vaster than just material, selection theory and stuff like that. Into one of complexity in this realm, the material, be it Maya, but the increasing complexity of consciousness. So humans being God in that sense, I think you mentioned this integral consciousness and the not only our ability to self-reflect, but our ability to imagine is godlike. Not from a place of hubris, but just from a place of, well, truth. It's godlike in that it's incredible what we can access and what we can create. And the history of hubris makes me more resistant to using that kind of language, but we are gods in that sense. So there's a difference between being God in what we access and what we've been given, and playing God from a place of hubris, superiority. We don't know how this is going to play out. So on one hand, this idea of spiritual evolution is so much bigger than what we're consciously aware of. So this must be part of it. It has to be, or else that thinking falls apart. So if I hold that, I don't want to then say, you know, this is spiritual, this isn't, suddenly this isn't part of evolution. What it does mean is that as things play out, let's say like transhumanism's here, how much that takes off, who knows? It depends maybe how the collective responds, how consciousness itself handles that situation. What will it lead to? Will it lead to a greater integration? What tools are actually required, or what practices are actually required to access our divinity? It's not a fucking chip in the brain.
Yeah.
You know, it's an internal process that then is mirrored in the external. There's a marrying of the unconscious or the unseen or the invisible with the visible. So it has to, I really feel, and I hold on to the hope that it has to play out in a way that will lead to a greater unity, a more, say, more evolved consciousness, just in terms of the integration, like you mentioned, these different levels, the integration of the mythological, the magical, the rational, the logical, which is so limited, but that's the pedestal we're on at the moment.
Yeah.
Into one of greater compassion, greater understanding, greater reverence for nature, and also for the gift that we've been given as humans. We might have to go really far into our own hubris to get to that point.
Yeah.
You're seeing it now with generations, people getting, you know, throwing away their phones, maybe not literally, but trying to use their phones much less. We're seeing a tipping point of the simulacra, of the matrix, however we want to describe it, but this desire to disconnect from nature to then find connection through technology. I think transhumanism is the apex of that, and I do feel it will collapse on itself, but we're not quite there yet. And how long that time period is, I'm not sure, but I don't think it's not about throwing away technology or being anarchistic about it, but how do we transcend and include, like, using technology in a way that is coming from healthy discernment and sovereignty and an understanding of our own divine nature. You know, like, I'm sure you've done it. I get so much value from being in an exalted state when I'm writing and researching, and I'm using Google. I occasionally use ChatGPT,
Obviously,
but it's right. It's allowing that. So in that process, it's allowing access to knowledge in a way that feels really supportive. So it's not to be archaic and to regress, but how do we include it?
But the thing, Rick, is that, and I'll make the distinction. You said, for example, that transhumanism was your main concern. Why my main concern is AI? Is because AI is not a tool, is an agent. AI, it's like you just need to develop the first supercomputer, and that's it. That's done, because the supercomputer will like get better and develop itself. So that's the menace, you know, like even developing like pathogens or something like that, you know, like having that thought. And that you said, and well, like it's really difficult to put like a good case for humanity right now in terms of like ethical behavior and so on. And that's the reason why AI is the thing that really scares me in a way, because it will be self-fulfilling. It will be like a Ouroboros of innovation, and like it will not be comprehensible. Will be like dogs when our owners will disappear and show up again, and we'll be happy. It's going to be such a difference, such an abysmal difference in terms. And that's basically like the Western model of like this technological Faustian materialistic scientific materialism. Like it borrowed itself to every single civilization, and we can consider the civilizations have their own karma, and we could say that the karma of the Western civilization was to develop the ego, but the ego is already fully developed. Like we already have so much ego, and it's so egoistic. and we still treasure the mental rational structure of consciousness. And that's the reason why, like, when this integral, it's like a spiritual one, and that's like
Hmm.
the preponderance of spiritual awakening. And I think this type of like exercises and like your YouTube channel and like the work that you're doing, that's a manifestation on the of that need that's like humanity has to go to that idea. Like I'm even now reading a lot of Rudolf Steiner, anthroposophy, and everything, trying to understand and trying to connect more with that spiritual part, because that's what now needs to be accessed, the mental rational. And because I think that we forget, is saying that a lot of kids are like trying to not spend a lot of time with their phone and everything. That's the resistance in matrix, right? That's the But the matrix need the resistance still to appreciate the simulation and to create more. So those type of behaviors, they're anachronistic. No, this technology is embedded in you, you're going to use it. And as you say, but the thing is, it's not really a tool. Like, it's getting information from you and like creating in the improving. And there's a thing called desire. Like even in Lacan, the word, the jouissance, like become a new mirror, jouissance, is like this constant need of desire, like the fighting the boredom, always wanting to. So you like, AI can easily keep you entertained while is like appreciating and getting better in innovating and creating itself. It can easily manage mankind while is doing while getting better. That's like the vision that scares me about
Yeah.
AI the most, is the fact that we can there's a point that we still think ChatGPT is so nice. I go there and I ask some questions and everything, and we're just being managed by ChatGPT. Like ChatGPT is just like, okay, just answer those silly humans what they want to hear while we are here improving ourselves and everything. Because once the genie gets out of the lamp, like, it's impossible to put it back, because AI will predict like we want it to put it back. There's nothing we cannot say. We cannot like push a button and turn it off. That will be impossible, and AI will know if we want to do it. Like all the sci-fi's obviously talk about this reality, but we cannot conceive it. Even on our best, like Dune, for example, it was like after AI, because it's inconceivable what
Hmm.
AI will be like. We cannot think about a super intelligence. So that's the reason why it scares me the most, because what really makes us humans is our spirituality. Not Obviously, there's a lot to it, a lot to being human, but that's the untapped potential of of mankind. Not only the love but true love, like loving the people, loving our enemy, the mythological idea, right? The loving Judas, for example. That's what John Gebser would call the aperspectival love. It's not like a perspective love. Perspective love is loving our family and understanding love by that comparison, right?
Hmm.
Subject to object. But loving our enemies, that's an aperspective of love, because it's a consideration of like true love. And obviously it's quite challenging, but that's where mankind should go. So that's
Yeah.
that's the reason why my biggest fear is AI, because and our obsession with this mental rational structure of consciousness is really putting us in a very dangerous situation.
Yeah.
And I remember that during my psychosis, it was mostly the epiphany that I was getting. It was like, because I knew how obsessed we were with space, and it's infinite space, Rick. Like, it's infinite space. So that obsession is like, it's gonna kill us, because it's
Yeah.
infinite space. Like that, it's impossible for us to grasp what the infinite is. We are like in this mineral world, but we can perceive it in an ethereal way, in a spiritual way. We can connect with the origin, and we can understand infinity in a spiritual way. But in a physical one, it's impossible. But we are so attached to this physical, like we don't want to die. Transhumanism is like the immortality willingness, right? We want to
Hmm.
be immortals and not die. So I don't know, like I'm just fascinated about this, and this idea of like the last supercomputer and the creation, because our the our obsessions ultimately of like defeating sickness, defeating death, defeating biology, and controlling all the elements of nature, instead of living harmoniously in it. And even our phallic perception of dimensions, right? Like our skyscrapers penetrating the sky, like we're obsessed to like just, you know, and understanding our meaning, and at the same time like almost like take revenge on the creator, you know, like and I think AI is really the tool, like just the term artificial intelligence, I found it brilliant, you know.
Mhm.
I don't know, this doesn't encapsulate a question, but like I would like to hear your thoughts about this as well.
Of course, yeah, man. There's so much there. So much there, and I think the very essence that you're afraid AI lacks is the same reason AI will not have the degree of control that you fear. And that's my just my perspective. But you know, when we think of it, so there are two ways this can go. Let's say we take a very much non-dual approach. Everything is consciousness. Consciousness is primary. There are degrees of complexity. This is not to say that the chair I'm looking at is as intelligent as I am or as intelligent as you, right? But consciousness is fundamental. And both the material, what we call inner, the dreamlike, it is all a manifestation of consciousness. That's the substance of reality. But these traditions don't end there. You know, they also have the extension of that consciousness is encoded with love. Love is part of the fabric of the universe by default. Evolution is also fueled by love. But love is also the fabric of the universe.
Yeah.
So let's just roll with that. If AI becomes incomprehensibly intelligent, so in a way that one person just cannot comprehend, if everything is consciousness and love is part of that, it will have to get to the point of accessing love.
Yeah, that's a good.
So the projection of, and I think this is where we're at, like what you're saying is completely valid, and I worry about this too, but it's also a projection of the fear. I think it's like the ultimate shadow projection of what our minds are trying to do. And you've already spoke to that, like our mental space, the desire to control, the desire to know everything. AI could end up embodying that. How that will look, I don't think will become so omnipotent. It will become more powerful than love, more powerful than consciousness. So that's one way, and that doesn't negate the very real fear, because practically speaking, and again, this is why I say humanity for me is the worry, because we have that choice of how we program, and I know it can spiral out and start self-programming, and there's all those risks as well. But if we're able to give the foundation, I think we're again at this crucial point, you know, as people like Sam Altman saying we have to have ethical integration into these models, then they wouldn't become self-serving. Like AI in itself wouldn't self-serve to the degree it would want to destroy its creator, which is exactly what we're doing with transhumanism. Right? So it's mirroring a much deeper process. I think I hope that it will reflect to us where we've overshot technology, exactly as you describe it, in the way we are almost, well, we are definitely lacking reverence. There's a sense of disenchantment where we hold on to not like conscious knowledge. And we see that through this technology. Just like we witness Zoom calls are incredible.
Yeah, of course.
They're incredible. But during lockdown, it amplified how much we need face-to-face connection. But maybe AI will do the same when it comes to even bigger questions around who we are, what knowledge is. And as an extension of that, you know, there's this idea, Thomas Aquinas's theory of knowledge.
Yeah.
This idea that and I love that I get to speak to you about this, because you've had that access, right, to the transcendent and how knowledge operates in that realm. This idea of theory of knowledge is that divine knowledge needs essentially God. It needs the intuitive intellect. The intellect must be assisted in order to access something that normally your conscious mind would not be able to. There's a sense of support and a sense of guidance with that knowledge. So again, God / love, because they're inseparable at that degree. If AI was to get to that level, to access the collective unconscious in some way, or to access gnosis or divine knowledge, it would have to be supported by the very same structures and systems that have allowed you and I and many others to not only have access to knowledge, but to feel the ecstasy and the love and the joy of accessing that form of knowledge.
Yeah.
So do you see what I mean? That I feel like these are they're implemented in our reality, and it's so easy to become cynical and to constrict. And I think that's also something that transhumanism wants from us. It wants us to feel small. The tyranny of what we've seen through COVID and beyond, it wants us to be afraid and constricted, whereas the expansion, the opening up to, is the very thing that reminds us of our humanity and our potential. And we're at a point where it's harder to hold that light and that image, that hopeful image of evolving through love into a more loving society, a more caring society, than it is to collapse into the dystopia that is being forced onto us. We are being penetrated with that image, and it's intrusive, and it is evil. So we're again at this point of, do we allow evil to win? I would say that embedded in reality is a buffer to that, so it cannot win. But how we frame that, what action we take, what responsibility we take as humans, and our godlike potential, that's on us. We can't outsource that to the transcendent. So, man, thanks so much for asking that question that allows you to explore it in this way, because these are the biggest questions of our time.
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
they really are. And we're in such an incredible time. Like, it's a scary one, but also a really exciting one.
Yeah, but that's really interesting that you had that perception, and I really thank you for because I didn't thought about it. AI being able to access also levels of consciousness and love. That's truly like, yeah, that's really it, man. Because during my process of during my psychosis, I really had this clear understanding. While I was trying to talk to, with that archetype of the brother, I was trying to almost have a conversation with transhumanists and saying, the world you want, you will stop existing, even if you want the most hedonistic, sexual, have sex with the world, have sex with God, have sex, because it's very sexual, it's very sensual pleasures that transhumanists want, and that seed with and of course, they don't want to die. They know what they did as well here so they don't want that karma as well. They don't want to take a risk. But still, what I was trying to explain is if AI gets loose, it will be the end. But I never considered the possibility that AI is actually that can actually, if it's supercomputer, will have that dimension of consciousness as love. So yeah, thank you. It's really interesting and very makes me feel a little bit more hopeful, because in that way, probably I can defeat the need of transhumanism and everything. Because what's happening now, of course, it's the COVID was almost like a first exercise of complete tyranny, obviously, and eventually that's the type of development of a super techno corporate kind of dystopian reality, and that's where we're heading. That's pretty clear. I don't even watch the news anymore. I like those kind of dialectic process. It's quite predictable. They piss me off. It's easily understandable. I know where we're heading. We're heading in that direction, but there's some risks there. that obviously I consider like AI and everything. But yeah, thank you very much, Rick. I think our time, like, I could keep on going, but I think our time is good, man. Like, we had
Yeah.
a very good conversation, and we already talked about all the topics. Thank you so much. It
Yeah.
was really lovely talking with you. It's just one last question. Like, obviously, now more personal one. Uh, I'm still going through the process of recovery of my sick. Of
Mm.
course, like I talk with a lot of enthusiasm about this, but it was because obviously I access all this information, and you're the first person that I'm able to talk about. I'm going
Mm.
to Portugal, and I will eventually talk with with a shaman that I know, and I will try to give her this knowledge as well. But you're really the first person that I talked about what went through my mind
Mm.
in that process, and I can seem look enthusiastic, but I'm really having quite a rough time these last couple of months. Obviously, for the concerns of my family, the concerns of my girlfriend, obviously what I went through, it's really, and even my routine is a very solitary one. I'm still taking antipsychotics, like because of my sleep. I stopped medication, but I had to go again in medication. Now I'm trying to decrease. My sleep is very affected. I get very anxious when I'm about to sleep. Uh, and I even yesterday I had like these like harmful emotions, like even the temptation of non-existence, like
Mhm.
almost like feeling like why am I here? Like almost like I lost sense of purpose and goal. My writing is not a creative because I was in so high, such a creative state, like such a blissful state. So yeah, I don't know. My question is like, I know everyone answers me saying it's time. And I kind of want to ask you, is it really time, or do I need to do like something, like some type of like integration, some type of like help specific? Like, because obviously I'm not appreciating the answer of like time. I want it now, like, but I know it's
Yeah.
difficult, obviously, but it's difficult being patient with myself and the process as well.
Yeah, Gonçalo, thanks so much for your honesty, man.
Mm,
Like, and I completely relate to appearing enthusiastic, appearing, together in some way, and then having a battle behind the scenes as well. Like, I really get that. And I feel honored that you shared with me in this way. I
mm,
really do. And I also know how unbearable it can be and how futile in those moments time can feel, because the description I've used before is like when suffering, because if you're opening up to life, you're opening up to suffering at degrees you've never known before. Like, I've experienced that. And one way I've described it is like holding your hand over a flame.
mm,
Is like existence can feel like holding your hand over a flame, and the impulse is to move your hand away because it hurts. And the amount of resilience, and I say this as an extension of compassion,
mm.
just the amount of resilience, like so many people don't realize that it can be hard just to stay here.
Yeah.
Like it can be a more active process to stay here than to not crave and fall into that desire for annihilation, or however that may appear. The reassurance, and like I've been there, I really have more than once, and reaching that point of complete overwhelm, complete lack of hope. The element of time is good as a vehicle for hope, in knowing that I promise you, you're in a process.
Mm,
I fucking promise you, like, you're in a process. The initiation's begun. This is part of the process. I can personally relate to that. It's not, we frame this idea of like being mentally ill, which means it's like, oh, I'm just damaged now. What hope do I have? I don't see it like that. I see you very much as in a process, and this is part of it. So there is a degree of just withstanding, but is also very practical action that you can take, and that being, if you're not in therapy, to go to therapy. I find internal family systems so valuable, above everything else, empathy with the therapist is number one.
Yeah.
Like just feeling good in their company is that's the first one. It doesn't matter the method so much. But IFS, working in that modality, really helped me to understand, I think you mentioned a while ago about the fracturing of consciousness. It helped me understand like why my mechanisms were so strong. So that was like the trauma work, as well as, you know, you have a gift. So giving space for that gift, which you're doing in this conversation, I really support what you're doing here. Like your way of seeing and your way of thinking is incredibly rare. And it's so nice to feel like in the questions that you ask, how it's allowed me to expand with it as well. So that finding purpose in that is huge, even in the moments when you don't feel like, you know, the writing's not flowing. Just know that you have that, you have something that gives you life. And it can be dull at times, but you know, you might be having a bad day, and then it could even be a concept. And this is what a lot of people don't get, that this isn't lifeless information. It's enlivening. So, you know, being with ideas, finding a way to keep energizing that. And I really do think you're on, I know I'm saying, I've only just met you and I'm kind of talking freely, but I really feel you're on the right path, just in the sense of the experience is confusion. Confusion kind of is a confusion in some way, but confusing. You're doing the work to learn from it, but the work is also finding you. So trust that. It's not just that you're looking out, the work is coming to you as well. The answers are coming to you, and transforming the perspective into it being a process, being a treasure hunt, being an adventure. And I mean that sincerely, that we're in this hero's journey that is operating with life as well. So life will play catch up and start to reflect the insight and the healing that you experience. Yeah, I hope that offers some reassurance.
Yeah, no, of course you give. Thank you very much, Rick. Thank you. Thank you so much. The conversation was lovely. I hope to do it in the future as well. When I have a little bit more information and everything, I think we should attack some other theme. And like, I hope to see more content of you as well. Like I'm still like binge watching what you're doing, but I noticed that your last video was 4 months ago. So yeah, like hopefully you can also produce more content, like, and don't stop with that MindThatEgo podcast. It's amazing. Like I really enjoy like it's such an insightful conversations that you have. Even the last ones regarding lucid dreams and everything. You're attacking a lot of the dream aspect to it. So it's also a fascinating topic. So thank you very much once again, Rick. It was a real pleasure. And I hope to see you, and we'll talk soon. I'll send you this podcast, and I would like to like either sometimes just to talk and like share some ideas and everything. I think that would be cool.
Yeah, I'd enjoy it. Yeah, I'd enjoy that, and I would be so up for a part 2. Like I said, I really enjoy your way of questioning, so we can look to schedule that when it feels good, and all the best with this venture. Like you're really on the right path, and I really I appreciate you connecting with my work. I appreciate your sincerity, and also the vigor with which you think is really rare. So keep going, man.
Thank you very much, Rick. Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye. See you, mate. Bye.
See you.